Good afternoon, everybody. We are starting the afternoon session in this room with Helena Lynn, who will be talking about promoting effective research data management practices through integration of digital research tools. Before she starts, I'd just like to remind you that we have a conference app, which I'm sure you've all downloaded, through which you can ask questions of the speaker. We'll do our best to locate your question and ask her, and if we can't, we'll also ask you to raise your hands and pass the microphone around. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Helena.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'll just make sure I stand here. So I'm a digital research support officer at the University of Sydney. As a researcher coming into the University of Sydney, they're faced with a few different issues regarding their research data management. The first is a very complex policy environment. So these are just a few of the policies that govern the research data management space. So as a researcher trying to navigate this, how do they actually find the right pieces of information to convey to them what they're supposed to be doing around their research data management? There's also a complex university environment. So we're a very large institution. We have 40,000 students and over 15,000 staff. So there's many professional service units which can aid in the research data management space. So this is the library, ICT, the research office. There's also at the school level or the faculty level or individual academic peers of the researchers. So there's lots of different places where they can go to get information, but where's the right place to find the right help that they need? There's also multiple digital research platforms. So these are just some of the research platforms that are available at the university. Some of these are approved by the university because they meet our research data management requirements. So things like CloudStore or RedCap or Lab Archives, they all meet our research data management requirements and we provide them to the university community. Others like Dropbox are not approved by the university, but they're still widely used among the research community, as I'm sure everyone realizes. But with these complex platforms, how are researchers supposed to decide where exactly they're putting their research materials? Where do they put their research documentation? Where do they put their research data? Where do they put their safety documentation, etc.? So this is a problem because it causes total and utter confusion among researchers. So this wastes valuable time and it also wastes really limited research funds. It also leads to poor retention of research data. So this isn't just by the individual researchers and their groups, but also by the institution. So the institution is not effectively retaining research data. There's also difficulty for the researchers around managing complex collaborations, which obviously has lots of intellectual property concerns. Fundamentally, there's a lack of compliance with the Australian Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research, which should be binding all of Sydney University researchers. So what's the solution to this? So there's a photo of my team here, so obviously I think we're part of the solution. But to give you some context about our team, we're led by the research data steward, Gareth. There's 2 digital research support officers, myself and Danny, and also senior policy officer, Adele. We also have a security consultant who's not pictured here, but he obviously advises on security issues. So we were appointed about a year ago to effectively help researchers to ensure that they were protecting their research integrity, their academic honesty, but also their intellectual property. And we do this through a few different ways. So all of us used to be researchers, and Gareth is still a researcher, but we try really hard to engage with researchers to make sure that we understand their research needs. So we're not just engaging with academics, we're also engaging with research students and research managers at all levels to ensure that we understand what researchers need. We also provide advice and at-elbow support for all research data management issues. If it's not something we can immediately fix for them, we liaise with other professional service units, so the library, ICT, etc., to ensure that we're fixing those problems for researchers. We also try to simplify and improve policy. So our senior policy officer, Adele, she's been doing lots of work over the past year, engaging with all levels of the university, so the executive level, at the school level, at the faculty level, to ensure that she distills down the core principles of the research data management policy and conveys them to those communities. She also makes sure that research data strategy meets the needs of researchers and actually centres their needs. She also is currently rewriting our research data management policy to ensure that it's staying up to date with the current research data management climate, and also making sure that it enables researchers to effectively conduct their research. So she'll be presenting about this tomorrow, if anyone wants to go to her talk. The last part, which is what most of my talk will be focusing on, is simplifying and improving digital research tools. So we do this in 3 different ways. We advise researchers in the use of the right digital research tools for the right purpose. We also make sure that we deliver the appropriate trainings and appropriate support materials for researchers, the ones that they request and the ones that they need. And we make sure that the tools that we provide actually meet their needs and meet policy requirements at the same time. So the 2 platforms that I'm going to be talking to you about today are firstly the institutional e-notebook, which is provided by Lab Archives, and also the University of Sydney Research Data Store. Both of these platforms have thousands of users, but we would really like to increase uptake even further, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So for those of you who haven't seen Lab Archives or the e-notebook, this is a sample image from a lab-based notebook. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's a notebook navigator. This notebook navigator has a folder structure with subfolders and then pages, and then the actual content of the notebook is kept on these pages. Once you click on one of these pages, it opens up on the right-hand side, and you can see that you can store all different types of information on these pages. You can store images, you can store text, you can store your raw data files, you can store tables, you can store videos, anything that you really want, with a few limitations that I'll talk about in a couple of slides. One of the important things as well is you can see that every single entry in the top right-hand corner, it has an author attribution and it has a timestamp. So this provides a really substantial audit trail. Every single thing that is done in the e-notebook, everything that's changed or added, is kept in the revision history, providing this significant audit trail. All the data is also stored very securely. It's encrypted in transit and at rest. And it's also stored on an Australian server, which meets our research data management requirements. This is just a quick picture of the research data store. So this is a network-attached storage device. It's at the petabyte scale. It is mountable to your local system, so this is just one of the mounted drive. And every single one of your partitions, you can request as much space as you need for that particular project. And this is just some microscopy data that's shown here. It's also accessible not just on the university network, it's obviously accessible also through virtual private networks. So both of these tools have a series of advantages and also limitations associated with them. This slide is listing some of the advantages. So firstly, for the e-notebook, it allows contextualization of the research process, and that's one of the key features that we really love about this particular tool. So not only can you add all your files there with some limitations, but you can also provide context of the research process, but also metadata, etc. So e-notebooks are also very easily shared, and so collaboration is easily managed. There's that detailed audit trail that I mentioned earlier, and this essentially is protecting researchers and protecting the university with research integrity, academic honesty, and also intellectual property concerns. The research data store, on the other hand, it's providing very secure storage. There's substantial backup and disaster recovery protocols, and it's suitable for extremely large files. So Lab Archives is a cloud-based platform, but this is like a local drive or a networked drive. So you can store gigabytes or terabytes of data really easily. So file series also with hundreds or thousands of files can easily be stored here, and files that need to be accessed locally by an application. But both of these also have limitations associated with them, and these limitations prevent the amount of uptake that we would like in the university community. So some of the limitations for Lab Archives are the file limit of 4 gigabytes. There's also poor handling of those hundreds or thousands of files. And there's also difficulty with files that need to be accessed locally. So if you're using programs like EndNote, SPSS, MATLAB, etc., you need to actually download the file, then edit it, and then re-upload it. On the research data store side, files are divorced because it's just like a file system. Files are divorced from the broader research context and process, and that's not something we want for research data management requirements. There's also no audit trails, so it's hard to track file changes and deletions, and there's also limited intellectual property controls. So hopefully what you've seen from these two slides is that the advantages of one of the platforms are the limitations of the other, and vice versa. So we've had lots of complaints about these particular limitations, and so working to fix these both simultaneously by integrating the two systems. So the way that we built this integration was through LabArchive's widgets. And essentially we wanted to build a window into the research data store, and I'll show you how we did that next. So these are LabArchive's widgets. Essentially they're little coded applets that can be inserted into any entry anywhere in the notebook. Many of them are inbuilt. Lots of them are around the lab-based sciences. So these are some examples. There's a chemical sketcher, there's a bacterial growth calculator, and a scientific calculator, just as examples of dozens that are there. But you can also build your own widgets. These widgets can either be really simple widgets for data entry that helps you improve your workflow around particular repetitive data entry, but they can also be very complicated, and the only thing limiting you, other than some system limitations, is the ability of you to code that widget. So this is an example of a widget editor. You need to input HTML code and some simple script to run the HTML, and so this is just an example of some sample widget. But this was the process of the development. So we established a research data store integration working group. So this included members of my team, the research data strategy team, ICT for coding and project management, also members of the library, and a substantial presence of academics. So these were both users of the eNotebook and the research data store. We wanted to make sure that this project was actually meeting the needs of researchers, but also was across all the professional service units as well. The stages of development are on the right-hand side of the page. You can feel free not to read those. Essentially, all it's saying is that there was an extensive testing and feedback process. So we tested it, we made sure that it was meeting researcher needs. They gave us feedback about what feature improvements we could do. So eventually, we were actually deploying a product that they would actually need and use. So this is what it looks like when you insert it into a LabArchive's entry. We've called it the UCID RDS link. So essentially, you just need to log in with your university credentials. So this is our UniKey system, so just a username and password. Once you log in, this is what you see. So this is going back to that sample page. You can see in the bottom half, there is this widget that's open. In the top half, we imagine that people will be putting their the research process and their metadata in the notebook, and then they'll insert this widget. When they insert this widget and they log in, all of their research data store partitions will be displayed to them. Then they can navigate through their research data store through the eNotebook and highlight any particular files that are associated with this particular study or this particular experiment. So once you've selected any number of these files or folders, it generates a series of links. Okay, so these links are linking to the files as they're stored on the research data store. You can see that one thing that it's done is it's kept at the end of each of the links some preliminary metadata around that file. So the file size and the date last accessed is listed there. So it's providing some of that like audit trail that isn't present in the research data store alone. You can also see that once you change any of the files or you delete any of the files in the research data store, that the widget is able to track these. So it has little flags which indicate that a file has been updated or a file has been deleted, therefore again ensuring that we have some degree of audit trail over our files in the research data store. Files are also very easily accessible from the eNotebook. So even though they're stored in the research data store, they're easily accessible from the eNotebook. So if I show you this little video here, you can click a link to a file, and it will directly open up that file from the research data store. So from a workflow perspective for the researchers, it means that they can be working in the eNotebook, recording their research process, but not needing to go to a separate system in order to find their files and locate them and do what they need to them. They can open them from the eNotebook, edit them, and then they're saved as a singular copy inside the research data store. So this has been deployed now. So essentially what this integration has done, it was a very simple integration, but it improves both the eNotebook and the research data store simultaneously. So research context and process can be stored in the eNotebook, but any type of file, so with no limitation, can be stored in the research data store, but accessed from the eNotebook. This adds an audit trail, as I mentioned, to the files in the research data store, and it means that there's no file duplication, there's no downloading the file, editing it, re-uploading it. There's only one version of the file, and it stays in the research data store. There's been a positive reception so far, so lots of the researchers we've talked to in fields that we haven't really had much traction with, so things like math, statistics, some of the more heavy kind of coding fields, they're much more likely to use these particular tools now that we've built this integration. We've also had many requests for integrations with other systems, so other digital research platforms, but also e-learning platforms. So there's the scope here to have multiple different types of integrations to try and make the workflow for researchers easier, but we just need to prioritize what they want. And that's it. I think I went very fast, but it's good. You can all have 10 minutes to sit around and think about things. So I'd like to thank you all for coming to the talk. This is the Research Data Store Integration Working Group. I'd like to thank all of the members who contributed to a successful project, and I'll take any questions.